Alessandro Sciamarelli. He is the Director of Economic Studies and Market Analysis with the European Steel Association, EUROFER. As I have shared with you earlier this morning, he is not here today. He has not been able to travel because of his doctor's advices due to his health issues, but he has kindly forced himself to join us online today. Thank you very much, Alessandro, for joining us despite all the health issues you have been going through. And I would like to leave the floor to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Good morning, everybody. Apologies again for not having been able to be there in person, but conference again, as I did over the past few years. So I would like very much again to thank the organizers. I'm doing better, but I was really eager to join, even a little bit remotely, this very important conference. So I am Alessandro Sciamarelli, Director of Economic and Market Research at EUROFER, which is the European Steel Association. And my presentation is primarily intended to give you an overview of the outlook for the steel market in the EU under quite challenging times due to multiple downside factors, uncertainty over energy prices since 2022, high inflation, monetary tightening as a consequence of inflation, war scenarios, which have all resulted in very weak demand over the past 2 years. And my outlook covers this year, 2023 and 2024. Most of these numbers are also reflected in our quarterly economic and market outlook, which is available on our website, which I invite you to read. And then in the end, I will also briefly touch upon two important longer-term policy issues, which, however, are expected to have repercussions on steel market developments and on developments in the EU steel industry in general over the next few years. The first is CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which you all might be aware of, and a possible agreement on aluminium and steel, so the so-called GSSA, between the EU and the US. So I will get started as first with a quick overview of the macroeconomic outlook in the EU, which I would say very much mirrors disappointing developments in the steel market, as we will see later. However, the European economy has somewhat proven more resilient than expected, despite all the downside factors which I've just mentioned, high energy prices, particularly in 2022, high inflation, monetary tightening. So GDP growth has proven quite resilient on a quarterly basis up to Q3 2023. So the outlook continues, however, to be uncertain due to these downside factors, resulting in expected recession in Germany, which is the largest European economy, albeit moderate, minus 0.5% in 2023, followed by moderate recovery in 2024. But the overall recession is ruled out for the entire EU in 2023, although GDP growth will be rather low according to major forecasters. The European Commission says 0.6% in 2023 and then 1.3% in 2024. And our latest forecast, EUROFER, is 0.6% in 2023 and 1.1% in 2024. Overall, however, we call this the most likely scenario a soft landing scenario, which means that in the EU we should be able to lower inflation, which has been the major drag on the economy in the past 2 years, without having economic recession. But as I just said, economic growth will be very, very low. And overall inflation will slow down also this year in 2023 as a whole. 6.5%, however, very, very high in historical terms, but compared to 9.2% in 2022, and will further slow down to 3.5% in 2024. However, still above the 2% ECB target. Yeah, the latest leading indicators confirm somehow the deterioration in the economic outlook overall. On the left-hand side, you see the composite PMI output index released by Standard & Poor's, which signals a 6th consecutive month reduction in business output in the private sector in the euro area. However, the contraction rate, the negative growth rate has been lower in October than previously. But however, the index is at quite low levels in historical terms. On the right-hand side, you see the overall economic confidence in Europe, and you see that overall business confidence and the economic confidence are weakening as a result of multiple downside factors which are ongoing. And overall, the impact of monetary tightening, the rise in interest rates by the ECB will continue to affect the industrial outlook, particularly in the manufacturing sector, in the coming months. It's worth recalling that most of the moderate economic growth which we've seen in Europe over the last few quarters came primarily from the services sector, whereas the manufacturing sector has been much weaker. A quick glimpse at developments in inflation. Inflation has been the major drag on the European economy overall over the past 2 years. Inflation reached levels unseen since 1985 in October 22, 12%, but then has been going down quite remarkably, slowing down to 3.6% in October. However, the comparison is with October 2022, so it is a bit distorting in a way, but however, inflation has been slowing down, and also in most individual member countries. So I've already mentioned the latest inflation, so 6.5% in 23 and 3.2% in 2024. But however, core inflation, which is inflation excluding food and energy, which are more volatile items, remains high, 5.1% in September, which is the latest data available. So despite the lower impact of energy prices on overall inflation, core inflation remains high. So inflation is a more endogenous problem, and that's something to do with the endogenous developments in the economy rather than being energy driven. So as a consequence of this record high inflation, the ECB has raised its policy rates up to 4.50% in September, latest hike from zero still in July 2022. There is still a debate going on also in the US whether monetary policy tightening has come to an end or will come to an end shortly. It is not very well known or whether this is going to happen, but for sure, current policy rates will stay at the current level for some time, at least as long as inflation will not decrease further from current levels. So inflation has remained an issue, albeit decreasing, and latest leading indicators for the industry reflect pretty much the deterioration in the economic outlook and impact of inflation and monetary tightening. You see on the left-hand side the evolution of orders from main steel-using sectors in the EU since January 2017. So orders have proven resilient throughout 2022, despite already the impact of very high energy prices in the summer of 22 and all war-related disruptions and monetary tightening, but then have felt the impact of all these downside factors and been decreasing sharply, particularly in the second half of 2023. Only orders of automotive, which is the red line, were in positive territory in October 2023, particularly orders for construction and metal goods were in negative territory, sharply decreasing. And on the right-hand side, you see the evolution of another major leading indicator for the industry, industrial production, which also anticipates developments in real GDP, industrial production for the entire manufacturing sector in the EU and major individual European economies. The key thing here is that whereas industrial output has recovered up to pre-pandemic levels in the EU, in Spain, and in Italy, it has remained below pre-pandemic levels in France, but particularly in Germany. Germany is the orange line you see there. Output levels are still far below the levels which were seen in 2019 before the big drop, the collapse due to the pandemic in Q2 2020. So the German manufacturing sector is very weak. It suffers very much from the current economic situation, and this explains very much the recession in Germany we're going to have this year. Then we go to an overview of the evolution of output in steel using sectors, which very much represent demand for steel producers. That's exactly where the demand comes from. So what we see here is simply the evolution of growth in real output in year-on-year terms in different quarters for major steel using sectors. Output has continued to slow down output growth until Q2 2023, but overall sweep, you see there, the dotted line has proven rather resilient, but however, growth has been slowing down. It was still quite robust up to first quarter of 2022. Then the impact of the multiple downside factors has impacted output in steel using sectors, particularly construction, which, as expected, has entered recession and has been in negative territory for 3 consecutive quarters since Q4 2022. We'll talk about that later, about construction sector. And on the other hand, the automotive sector has seen his output rebound over the last 5 quarters, so 5 consecutive quarters of growth. But however, this has resulted in output volumes which are still far below those of 2018, before the first recession in the automotive sector, even before the pandemic. And this is a summary. I won't go through each number. Obviously, you will be able to see that in detail when the presentation will be made available to all of you. But the main point here is that sweep has steel weighted industrial production for all steel using sectors has increased quite remarkably in 2022, particularly thanks to the first good performance in the first half of the year, but obviously has been slowing down considerably in 2023, and we expect a growth of just 0.6%. However, no recession in sweep is foreseen, more or less as we've seen for the general economy, but we see also a very low growth in 2024, so no rebound in growth due to the uncertainty which is expected to last at least until second quarter of 2024. The current scenario is very unpredictable, but industrial activity is expected to remain weak. So 0.4% growth expected in 2024. When it comes to individual sectors, construction is expected to see a recession in 2023, minus 1.7%, but it might be revised downwards with our next outlook. The construction sector is now in recession. We see it from other leading indicators, mostly due to the rise in interest rates by the ECB, which has impacted particularly the housing sector and housing demand. Whereas public construction has been more resilient thanks to government support, but the construction sector will be in recession this year and will grow by a modest 0.2% in 2024. The automotive sector, on the other hand, also in 2023 will record growth, quite robust, plus 7% in output. So 3 consecutive years of growth, but however, as I said, its output volumes will not recover the losses seen during the pandemic. We recall that in 2020, automotive sector experienced the sharpest drop in output among all steel user sectors, because it's the European steel user sector which is most vulnerable to external shocks, or whose supply chain is particularly complex and is mostly exposed to fluctuations in trade, and in supply chain issues. But however, the automotive sector has recovered for 3 consecutive years. But however, we'll experience another downturn in 2024 due to particularly uncertainty from the consumer side in relation to the implementation of the EVs and hybrid vehicles, which are not very affordable still. Yeah, the market share of e-vehicles is increasing, but consumers remain very uncertain, and the implementation of electric vehicles in Europe is still a bit lagging behind. So this is the overall outlook for steel sectors, and we finally come to the steel market indicators. So you see here the evolution of supply in Europe for all qualities, total crude steel. Very simply, you see here in 2022, due to particularly the energy shock experienced in the EU, which was the most severe rise in energy prices ever experienced, and which had an enormous impact on production costs, crude steel production fell sharply by 11%, down to 156 million tons, which is 13 million tons lower than in 2019 before. So 30 million tons lower than pre-pandemic levels. And another drop due to the current downside factors which I mentioned, and due to weak demand prospects, is expected for 2023, which will be at least, according to our latest forecast, by minus 3.5%. The overall compound annual growth rate over the entire 2008 and 2022 period was minus 4%, which signals that there is a kind of long-term decline in steel production. So in a nutshell, production volumes have never recovered up to the levels that were seen in 2008, you see there. So this is the evolution of supply, and we come to apparent steel consumption. Here is the evolution in quarterly terms up to Q2 2023. There has been a clear slowdown since Q1 2022 due to the impact of the war in Ukraine and other downside factors, primarily the energy, the shock in energy prices. And this slowdown had followed a strong post-COVID rebound in 2021, you see there. But this slowdown has culminated in the second lowest level in apparent consumption on record in Europe, which has been seen in Q4 2022, the second lowest level after Q2 2020, which was entirely due to COVID and to shutdown of mills in Europe, which was followed by two quarterly improvements in Q1 and Q2 23, respectively, but still these quarter-on-quarter improvements translated into year-on-year drops by minus 11% and minus 8%, respectively. So the downturn in apparent steel consumption in steel demand in Europe is expected to continue at least up to Q4 2023, but a rebound appears to be likely only from Q2 2024, conditional of the uncertainty and the unpredictability of the current industrial and macroeconomic outlook. Here we see an expansion of what we've seen in the previous slide. Basically, these are the year-on-year growth rates in apparent steel consumption and also the imports. So the main point here is that apparent consumption in the EU experienced a recession in 22 due to the energy price shock and to the deterioration in demand. The recession was minus 7.2%, which was quite severe. In 2020, due to COVID, we had a recession of 11%, which was entirely due to COVID, to an external shock. And then was followed by a strong rebound in 2021 by 16%. But the recession this year, last year, is expected to be followed by another recession, another drop in apparent consumption. According to our latest outlook, which was published in the end of October, we foresee a drop of minus 5.2%, which is more severe than previously foreseen. Previously, we had foreseen a drop of minus 3%. And in 2024, we expect thanks to particularly a positive second half of the year. We expect a rebound of 7.6%, but however, volumes will remain below not only pre-pandemic levels of 2019, but also below the levels seen in 2021 when demand rebounded strongly. And then you see also the evolution of imports on a quarterly basis. Imports have been decreasing constantly over the last 4 quarters, primarily as a reflection of very weak demand. So they have mirrored developments in steel demand. But as a result, however, despite this continued decrease in this continued decrease in quarterly terms, imports have, let's say, have maintained quite a high share of steel demand in Europe, and as an overall result, the steel trade balance of the EU versus all third countries has been deteriorating considerably. So what you see here is the evolution in annual terms of the steel trade balance for finished products, with the deficit being recorded over the last 6 consecutive years, and particularly this steel trade deficit has been widening further in 2021 and 2022, up to 12 million tons. So this signals that the European steel market remains vulnerable to imports, although they mirror the evolution of steel demand. But in terms of trade balance, the EU is almost becoming structurally a net importer of finished steel products. And then these are the main conclusions on the, let's say, market indicators and our market data analysis, which I've just mentioned. I won't go through them. I won't repeat what I've just said. Basically, the main point that I want to make here is the bottom line, the conclusion here, which is that the EU steel market remains vulnerable to upswing and downswings in demand. We've seen a lot of volatility in apparent steel consumption over the past few years due to multiple shocks, COVID, supply chain issues, war in Ukraine, shocking energy prices, and so forth. In addition to this, we've had over the past 2 years a lot of inflation, up to record high levels, with subsequent monetary tightening, which has impacted the manufacturing outlook quite considerably. And import pressure remains also an issue, which translates into an import share of demand which remains around high levels in historical terms. So these are the main challenges in the short term: very weak demand, critical situation in relation to demand in Europe still, which is likely to continue at least up to Q2 2024. But overall recession in the EU is ruled out for the moment, and the EU economy is not in recession thanks to the positive contribution provided by the services sector. But however, the entire manufacturing sector, including the steel sector, are rather weak. Then the last point of my speech is about 2, I would say, longer-term policy issues, which are equally very important and which may influence developments in the overall steel industry in the future, and particularly in the overall steel industry and steel trade governance in the future, so to say, in terms of relationship between the EU and other major steel producing countries. The first is obviously CBAM, which you are very well aware of, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which has just entered its transition phase from 1st of October this year up to 1st of January 2026, which is something which has just begun. And as European steel industry, as European steelmakers, our policy ask is primarily that during the transition phase, free CO2 allowances, which are currently granted under the ETS, are maintained for the EU steel industry, so that we, as a steel producer, we won't have to cope with an additional cost burden, which is represented by carbon costs, which other steel producing regions don't have to cope with. So for the future, the CBAM will enter into force in its ultimate version, in its definitive phase, on 1st of January 2026. But lots of technical details have to be set out yet. So there are lots of elements and key issues which are not yet fully defined and will have to be set out by the European Commission and the Council according to the EU legislative process in the near future, with a lot of legislative acts. So we will see how the CBAM will be definitely shaped, and this is something which is largely unforeseeable at the moment. And also in terms of trade repercussions, which are obviously possible and are expected, these are also impossible to foresee. But in our view, it is important to underline that CBAM is primarily intended to be an environmental measure, which is intended to create a greener steel market in Europe and to ensure a greener steel market via lower CO2 content of steel products in the European market. So it should not be seen as a trade measure, but as an environmental tool, which is instrumental to achieving the EU's environmental target and obviously the objective of full decarbonization by 2050. And most importantly, CBAM is something which targets individual products and not countries. So this is another thing which is important. But as I said, in our view, it is early to say whether CBAM will work or not. So its effectiveness still has to be fully proven in our view. So this is something which we'll see for the future, but will certainly have an influence also on steel making in Europe on the way to full decarbonization, which is a commitment that the EU steel industry has taken. A second policy issue, which is, I think, very interesting, is an initiative which has been undertaken jointly by the EU and the US, the GSSA, the Global Agreement on Aluminium and Steel. The objective is primarily to overcome frictions which were mostly due to US Section 232, which was established in 2018, and then we saw other measures being taken on both sides of the Atlantic, but particularly the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, to which many European industrial sectors have called for a European answer to the IRA, which grants a lot of subsidies to industrial sectors wanting to relocate in the US. The objective of the GSSA is, as I said, to overcome these frictions and to come to a global, or as large as possible, an agreement which may be able to address the current issue of global access capacity, which is something relevant. The OECD has been working very much on that and to how to address global overcapacity of steel at a global level. But we need certainly a comprehensive agreement among major steel producing regions, and that's something which the EU and the US have undertaken. Now talks are going on, but it is a very ambitious project aiming at creating a level playing field, as I said, a comprehensive agreement, which requires a lot of political commitment from both sides, which is something very uncertain because you know very well we have elections next year, both in the US, the presidential elections, and in the EU. We will have a new European Parliament and a new European Commission. So the political landscape is uncertain, and developments are still unpredictable. But that's an initiative which we welcome very much. We hope that it could bring to improved relationships, trade relationships between the EU and the US, and also among steel producing regions worldwide, to set a level playing field of rules on trade, which may address the issue of global access capacity. So this is all from my side. I thank you very, very much for your attention. And if you have more questions, if you would like to know more about the underlying data, you can write me an email or contact me bilaterally. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. Grazie. Are there any questions from the floor? Mikrofon alabilir miyiz lütfen? Yes, we have one question from Mr. Dalbeler. Alessandro.
Can you hear me now, Mr. Sciamarelli?
Yes.
Okay, so I wish you a quick recovery. Sorry to hear that you had an accident. My question is about the last topic that you have just touched, about this negotiation that EU is currently holding up with the US. What's your personal expectation about the outcome? If it's going to be positive, if you reach an agreement, should we expect safeguard measurements to remain in place in Europe for a while, at least up until maybe CBAM comes into force?
Thank you for your question. Well, we will be asking, as the European steel industry, for an extension of safeguards up to 2026, which is the maximum extension we may have, because in any case, the safeguards will no longer be there after 2026. But this is something which goes, I think, beyond the scope of the GSSA, because the GSSA is something which is, as I said, is a more ambitious scope, as a more ambitious vision, which is to, as I said, address the problem of overall capacity at a global level, and to which is something which the safeguards cannot address. The safeguards are purely, let's say, trade measure in a way, which is intended to smooth out fluctuations in trade volumes on a monthly basis, in particular, so yeah, I would keep the two things separate. That's what I say. But if you ask me about the likelihood of the successful GSSA, I don't know. Really, frankly speaking, I need a crystal ball. But as I said, it very much depends on political developments, which are now unforeseeable.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from the floor? May I have one myself, single last question. We have heard that the Chinese car exports, particularly EV exports, have been surging recently. And if I'm not mistaken, there has been an influx of imports into the EU, and an investigation has been started against the EV imports from China into Europe. So I've got actually two questions. The first one is, how much do you think the European steel industry has felt an impact because of these Chinese car imports into the EU market? And then, do you think this is a result of a chain reaction created starting from the safeguard measures implemented in the market?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your questions. Well, the first question is about the impact that the EU steel industry has felt. We have not felt yet any particular consequences, but for example, it's not a secret that the EU industry association, the car the Car Makers Association is very much vocal on this, because the inflow of relatively cheaper Chinese EVs on the European market is relevant. It's something which is growing, but we haven't felt yet on the consumption side from the automotive sector. We haven't felt any particular impact so far. For us, the major problem also remains that I said that despite the rebounds over the past 3 years, demand of cars and therefore demand of steel for the car industry, from the car industry remains at around low volumes, and is also expected to remain weak at least in 2024 and possibly also in the next few years, because there are too many factors of uncertainty in this respect. The second question, no, I do not think that this enormous, let's say, penetration of Chinese EVs into the European car market is connected to safeguards or any particular trade measure which has been undertaken at the EU level. I think it's purely a reflection of the fact that the Chinese car industry has been able to invest massively on the production of batteries, which are very competitive, and also China has the clear competitive advantage because it has some of the key raw materials which needs to be supplied for the production of the EVs on a very big scale, and this is something which creates an enormous advantage, whereas the EU relies on external suppliers for the production of batteries still to a large extent. Yeah, so I would say that this is primarily the reason.
Thank you very much indeed, Alessandro. Any other questions? None, I guess. So I thank you very much once again for taking the trouble to join us despite the accident.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Hope to see you in person soon. Thank you.
Yeah, so for me. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye.